The toast had gone fine until the groomsman opened his mouth a second time. Private Eli Casson was 19 3 weeks out of basic, sitting at the second table from the front with his dress greens, still smelling like the tailor's plastic. He watched his older brother Trent stand up, tap his glass, and say something kind about the bride. And then, because Trent never could leave a kind thing alone, add the line that made half the room go quiet. And hey, I know weddings aren't really your scene, but you did good up there. Real nice and simple. Not everybody's cut out for the big speeches. Some of us actually had to learn how to brief a room. Trent grinned around at the tables, the new lieutenant's bar still shiny on his collar. No offense. I know you never served a day, but hey, it's the thought that counts. A few people laughed, the way people laugh when they're not sure if it's a joke. Eli didn't laugh. He was watching the bride. He'd spent the whole reception trying to place her. Not in a bad way, just the way you try to place a song you've heard before but can't name. She moved through the room like someone counting exits without meaning to. When a server dropped a tray near the kitchen doors, half the hall jumped at the crash. She didn't. She just glanced toward the sound, registered it, and went back to her conversation, the way you'd glance at a clock you already knew the time on. His drill instructors back at basic had a phrase for that. They called it the floor of the room. Some people walk into a space and read it like a floor plan before they even sit down. Eli had laughed when he heard it the first time. He wasn't laughing now. She didn't flinch. She set her water glass down with the kind of stillness that made the room feel, for just a second, like it had tilted. Quiet. That was the word everyone used for her. The groom's quiet, steady fiancée, the one who worked at the county clinic, who never talked much about herself, who'd given a toast so short and plain that Eli's grandmother had whispered, "Sweet girl, isn't she?" like it was a small thing. Eli had met her twice. Both times, she'd looked at him the way some of his drill sergeants had, like she was reading. Something off him he didn't know was written there. Across the table, her father set down his fork. He was an older man, broad-shouldered, with a faded unit patch sewn onto the inside of his jacket where most people would never see it. He'd been quiet all night, too. Now he reached into his breast pocket and drew out an envelope, worn soft at the corners, the kind of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it had gone the color of a tea stain. "Trent," the old man said, not unkindly, "you're new, so I'm gonna let that slide once." He stood up slowly, chair legs scraping. "But I think it's time somebody told you who you're talking to." The room's attentions swung to him. Trent's grin faltered. Not from fear. He just looked like a man who'd walked into the wrong room and was starting to feel the temperature. "Sir, I didn't mean. I know you didn't." The old man's voice was even. He held up the envelope. "This was given to me 11 years ago, by a man I served 2 tours with. He asked me to keep it, said I'd know when to open it, told me, when she gets married, you read this out loud. Whatever's happening in the room, you read it." He looked down at his daughter. She hadn't moved. Her hands were folded in her lap, knuckles pale. "I think now's the time." Eli felt his pulse pick up without knowing why. Beside him, his mother leaned in. "What is that?" "I don't know," Eli whispered. But something in him, some new training, some instinct 3 weeks old, was telling him to sit very still and pay attention. The old man slid a thumb under the flap. The paper inside was thin, military issue, the kind that came folded into thirds out of a forward operating base. He unfolded it once, twice, and held it at arm's length, the way men do when their eyes have gotten older than they used to admit. "It's addressed to her," he said, but he wanted it read out loud. "So I'm gonna do that." He cleared his throat. "To whoever's listening the day this gets read." His voice caught for just a second. He pressed on. "My name doesn't matter much anymore. What matters is that 11 years ago, in a forward aid station that had no business holding, a 23-year-old combat medic kept it standing for 3 hours. After the wall came down and the radios went dead, the room had gone very quiet. Even the band in the corner had stopped tuning. She was the youngest medic to make it through her course, that cycle. Graduated top of a class that washed out more men than it kept. We used to joke she had ice water where the rest of us had nerves. That night, the joke stopped being funny and started being true. The old man's hand was steady now. Eli realized he was holding his own breath. 11 of us went down in that compound. 11 of us walked out. That's not luck. That's not a miracle. That's 3 hours of one woman working a sickle aid station with half her gear destroyed, calling triage out loud, so the wounded could hear her voice and know somebody was still in command of the situation. even when command had nothing left to give her but her. A woman 2 tables over put a hand to her mouth. Eli looked at the bride. She still hadn't moved, but something had changed in her face. Not pride, not embarrassment. Just the look of someone hearing a door from a long time ago creak open. When the relief column finally got through, the first thing she did, before she let anyone treat her own arm, which had taken shrapnel an hour earlier, and which she had not mentioned to a single person, was hand the incoming medic a card. On it, in her own handwriting, was the condition of every one of the 11 men, in order of priority with times written down while the building was still taking fire. The old man looked up from the page, just for a second, at his daughter. Her call sign in that unit was Larkspur. Most of us never knew her real name for the first 2 months, just Larkspur, because she kept growing back no matter how bad the ground got. I want whoever reads this to say that name out loud, in the room, on the day she gets married. Because somewhere in that room there is probably somebody who thinks they know her, and doesn't. He set the letter down on the table, flat like it weighed more than paper should. Her call sign, he said quietly, to the whole room, was Larkspur. For a moment nobody breathed. Then, from the back of the hall, a table Eli hadn't paid much attention to all night, 3 men in dress uniform who'd come in late and kept mostly to themselves, a chair scraped back. A staff sergeant, broad through the shoulders, gray starting at his temples, stood up first. He looked at the bride for a long moment, and then he said, in a voice that cracked on the second word, Larkspur. He said it like a password, like something he'd been carrying around for 11 years and had finally found the right room to set it down. In. The man beside him stood next, then the third. All 3 were in uniform, ribbons Eli didn't fully recognize catching the light, and all 3 were looking at the bride the way men look at someone they thought they'd never see again. Ma'am, the staff sergeant said, and his hand came up, slow, deliberate, the kind of salute that wasn't for show. I was litter 4. You wrote stable, hold on my card. I didn't know your name for 6 years. I just knew I was alive because somebody wrote that down in the dark. The second man's voice was rougher. Litter 9. I was the one yelling. You told me to shut up and breathe, and I did, because for some reason I believed you. He swallowed hard. I have 3 kids now. All 3 know the word Larkspur. None of them ever knew what it meant till tonight. The bride, Larkspur, finally moved. She stood, slow and careful, the way someone stands when they've spent years making sure a room never sees them rattled. Her eyes were bright, but her hands were steady. The same steady that had once written times and priorities on a card while a building came down. Around her. You don't have to, she started. Ma'am, the third man said gently but firmly with respect. We do. And then, table by table, the way a tide comes in. The room began to stand. It started near the back, with the 3 men in uniform still on their feet, hands at their brows. Then the older couples near the windows, the ones who'd served themselves or buried someone who had, rose without being asked. Then the younger guests, looking around, following the shape of something they could feel, even if they couldn't name it. Eli's mother stood. His grandmother stood, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, no longer calling anyone a sweet girl, just looking at her like she was looking at her for the first time. Eli stood too. He looked at his brother. Trent hadn't moved. He was staring at the bride, at Larkspur, with his mouth slightly open, the new lieutenant's bar on his collar suddenly looking less like a badge, and more like something he was embarrassed to be wearing. His face had gone the color of the tablecloth. He opened his mouth once, as if to say something, and then closed it again, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse, and some part of him, Eli could see it happening in real time, finally understood that. Slowly Trent stood too, not because anyone told him to, because the alternative, sitting, while a room full of strangers and family stood for a woman he'd spent the night condensing to, had become unthinkable. The groom, who had been frozen at the head table through the whole thing, crossed the floor in 3 steps and put his arms around his bride, and she let him, and over his shoulder she looked at the 3 men still standing at attention and gave them the smallest nod. The kind of nod, Eli thought, that probably meant more to them than the salute had meant to her. At ease, she said softly. Please, sit. It's somebody's wedding. They didn't sit right away. The staff sergeant said, Ma'am, we will, in 1 second. And he turned to the rest of the hall, to everyone still standing, and said simply, 11 of us are alive tonight because of her. Just wanted everybody to know that. Carry on. Then they sat. And slowly the room did too, but it was a different room now, warmer, quieter in a new way. The kind of quiet that comes after something true has been said out loud. Eli's father leaned over to him. "You good, son?" Eli realized he'd been standing for a while without noticing. He sat down, slow, the chair creaking the same way the old man's had. "Yeah," he said. He looked at his brother, who was staring at his plate now, color slowly coming back into his face, looking like a man doing the math on every word he'd said for the last 20 minutes. "Yeah, I'm good." He thought about his first week at basic. The drill sergeant who'd told them, on day one, that the most dangerous person in any formation was the one everyone underestimated, because they were usually the one who'd actually been tested. He'd thought it was just something drill sergeant said. Across the room, the bride, Larkspur, the quiet woman, the one who'd given the shortest toast of the night and meant every plain word of it, leaned her head against her new husband's shoulder for just a moment, eyes closed, the old letter still sitting on the table where her father had set it down. Her father reached over and put his hand over hers, and for once, in a room that had gone from laughter to silence to something like reverence, nobody needed her to say anything at all. The band, after a moment, started playing again, softer than before, like even they understood something had shifted. And somewhere near the back, 3 men in dress uniform sat with their drinks untouched, looking at the bride, the way men look at someone they owe a debt they can never quite finish paying, and were glad, for the first time in 11 years, that they finally had the chance to try. Eli Casson sat very still in his new dress greens, and decided that whatever else he learned in cis uniform, he was never again going to assume he knew who anyone in a room really was, not from how quiet they were, not from how they talked, not from anything but what they'd actually done. He thought about the floor of the room, about people who walked in already knowing where the exits were, and wondered how many of them he'd already met without knowing it. A teacher, a neighbor, the woman who bagged groceries on Tuesdays. He looked at his brother one more time. Trent wasn't looking at anyone. He was looking at the letter, still lying flat on the tablecloth, and for the rest of the night, he didn't say another word about anyone not having served. Later, when the band slowed and couples started drifting onto the floor, Eli watched him cross the room, slow, deliberate, the way a man walks when he's rehearsed something 3 times and still isn't sure it's enough. He stopped in front of the bride and said something Eli couldn't hear. Whatever it was, she nodded and after a moment, put her hand briefly on his arm. Not forgiveness exactly, Eli thought, but something close enough to it that Trent's shoulders came down an inch. Eli filed that away too. Some things, apparently, you didn't have to earn back all at once.